Hello, 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 guys. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back. As you can see, I am not holding the book that we're reading. I have my tortoise here. I wanted to share her with you guys. She is a 5-year-old Herman's tortoise. Her name is Ellie, and she's one of the many pets that we have at home. I also have a gecko, I have a black German shepherd, I have a black cat, and I randomly have the insects and crawdads that my husband and my son like to bring home from the creek and wherever they find them. But I wanted to share her with you guys. She's such an amazing and cool animal. She wants me to put her back down, but she's so cuddly and so gentle and so sweet. And I just wanted to show you guys to her because she's just such a beautiful creature. Look at that. How beautiful she is. You can actually tell what gender they are by how many spots they have here. And you can't tell that well, but the indentations, I don't want to leave her like that for too long. You leave a tortoise on her back, on their back for 10 minutes or more and they will die because their respiratory system gets crushed, basically. So I've learned, I know lots and lots about this particular type of tortoise, and I wanted to share her with you because she's just such a gem. She's such a sweet and cool pet to have. She's really a joy to our family. So I'm going to put her back 1 second. Okay, and now let's get to why we're here. We're going to be reading the next chapter in Beyond Religion, Ethics for a Whole World by the Dalai Lama. And we are on chapter 5, and we're going to be talking about compassion and the question of justice. So the first section is titled, The Question of Justice. On a number of recent occasions, thoughtful people who are sympathetic to the idea of secular ethics have objected to my suggestion that compassion can be the foundation of such a secular system. For many, it seems there is a conflict between the principle of compassion, which implies forgiveness, and the exercise of justice, which requires punishment for wrongdoing. As they see it, the principle of justice or fairness, rather than that of compassion, must underpin any humanistic approach to ethics. To give priority to compassion and forgiveness, they argue, would allow perpetrators of harm to go unpunished and hand victory to the aggressors. The ethic of compassion, they say, amounts to little more than an ethic of victimhood, under which aggression always triumphs. Wrongdoing is always forgiven, and the weak are defenseless. This objection rests, in my view, on a fundamental misunderstanding of what compassion entails in practice. Nothing in the principle of compassion, the wish to see others relieved of suffering, involves surrendering to the misdeeds of others, nor does compassion demand that we meekly accept injustice. Lost my bookmark. Far from promoting weakness or passivity, compassion requires great fortitude and strength of character. Some of the greatest fighters against injustice of recent times, people of strong character and determination, like Mahatma Gandhi, Mother Teresa, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King Jr., Václav Havel, and others, have been motivated by universal compassion. One could not describe such people as meek or retiring just because they combined their devotion to the welfare of others with a commitment to nonviolence. As I have said, compassion by no means implies surrender in the face of wrongdoing or injustice. When an unjust situation demands a strong response, as in the case of Arpethiad, compassion demands not that we accept injustice, but that we take a stand against it. It does imply that such a stand should be nonviolent. But nonviolence is not a sign of weakness, but rather one of self-confidence and courage. Generally, when people quarrel, it is only when they run out of arguments that they lose their temper and resort to shouting and even violence. But when parties to a dispute feel confident that truth is on their side, often they remain calm and continue to argue their case. So maintaining an attitude of calmness and nonviolence is actually an indication of strength, as it shows the confidence that comes from having truth and justice on one side. We might illustrate this point about the need to stand up to injustice while maintaining a compassionate concern for the wrongdoer with an example at a personal level. Imagine yourself with difficult neighbors who repeatedly behave aggressively towards you. What is the appropriate compassionate response? In my understanding, there is no reason why compassion, including, of course, compassion toward the aggressors, should prevent you from making a forceful response. Depending on the context, a failure to respond with strong measures, thereby allowing the aggressors to continue their destructive behavior, could even make you partially responsible for the harm they continue to inflict. In addition, doing nothing to oppose such behavior, in effect, encourages those unfortunate persons, with the likely consequence that they will move on to even more destructive behavior, bringing still greater harm to others and, in the long run, to themselves. The only way to change a person's mind is with concern, not with anger or hatred. Physical or violent measures can only restrain other physical behavior, never their minds. There is a story from southern Tibet about a person who tells a friend, "Such and such person hit me once. I kept quiet. He hit me twice. I kept quiet. He hit me 3 times. I kept quiet. He kept hitting me. I still kept quiet." This is an illustration of what compassion is not. This is meekness, and it is not the right way. What is required in the face of injustice is strong compassion. And the next section, broad and narrow concepts of justice. So there is no conflict between compassion, correctly understood, and the exercise of justice. In saying this, however, it is important to distinguish between the general principle of justice as a universal precept of fairness and redress based on the recognition of human equality, and the narrower understanding of justice as the exercise of the law within any given legal framework. Ideally, these two concepts of justice should always reflect one another, but sometimes, unfortunately, they do not. If we consider South Africa under apartheid rule, it is apparent that a judicial system can ignore the universal principle of human equality and instead protect the interest of a particular section of society. During that time, a non-white person could be punished for infringing the interests of the ruling minority, even in trivial matters. A similar situation prevailed in India under colonial rule and continues to do so in other parts of the world, wherever specific minorities and groups are suppressed by others. Clearly, such legal systems reflect a very limited conception of justice. There are also situations in which the rights of one religious community or political group are constrained by another. When a country's legal system enshrines national unity and social order as its highest priorities and deems any actions construed as undermining these values as criminal offenses, that legal system will not serve genuine justice. The long imprisonment of Aung San Suu Kyi after her election victory in Burma is an example of this. And the recent arrest of my fellow Nobel Peace Laureate Lao Zibo in China is another. When people criticize such violations of justice, countries defend themselves by saying everything has been done according to the rule of law. However, when the law is tied to narrow interests, it fails to uphold the fundamental concept of justice as a principle of fairness based on human equality. For the law genuinely to uphold justice, it must protect universal human rights. The role of punishment. Of course, most of us recognize justice as a universal principle of fairness, based on our fundamental equality as human beings, whether equality before God, equality in terms of our basic aspirations to happiness and the avoidance of suffering, or equality before the law as citizens. Yet it seems there is less consensus concerning the actual exercise of justice in matters of crime and punishment. For example, people disagree about issues such as the death penalty and the purpose of punishment. Some feel that certain crimes are so heinous, so negative, that their perpetrators should be shown no mercy. When it comes to wrongdoing, all the major religions have some idea of redress or of restoring the balance in the life or lives to come. In the theistic traditions, there is the understanding that there will be a divine judgment. In traditional Buddhist teaching, the law of karma ensures that individuals will eventually experience the fruits of their actions. Both of these beliefs allow mercy to be shown in worldly human affairs. From a secular point of view, without such beliefs in punishment and reward in the afterlife, we must ask ourselves what punishment is really about. Is it about retribution and revenge, about making wrongdoers suffer as an end to itself, or as an end in itself? Or is it more about preventing further wrongdoing? To my mind, the purpose of punishment is not to exact suffering as an end in itself. Rather, the suffering inflicted by punishment should have a higher purpose, namely to discourage the wrongdoer from repeating the offense and to deter others from committing similar acts. Punishment is therefore not about retribution, but about deterrence. I forgot to check the length of this chapter because I know that some of them are quite long. Oh yeah, this one was one of the shorter ones. Of course, courts of law must have at their disposal the means to punish wrongdoers. To leave terrible crimes such as murder and violent assault unpunished would be to suggest that the worst potentialities of humanity are somehow acceptable, and this would not be in the best interest of anyone, including the perpetrators of such crimes themselves. Punishment has an inevitable and an important role to play in the regulation of human affairs, both as a deterrent and to give people a sense of security and confidence in the law. However, if punishment were about deterrence alone, then it might be argued that even minor acts of wrongdoing should receive very severe punishments, as the most effective deterrent against such behavior. While this might be a way of ensuring low rates of crime, it is not an approach I can accept. It cannot be just to punish someone very severely for a minor misdeed. Instead, there should be some idea of proportionality. The more severe the offense, the more severe the punishment. But this raises the question, what are the limits of redress? Here, I think it is very important to recognize that all human beings have the capacity to change. Because of this, I find the idea of the death penalty unacceptable. This is why for many years I have supported Amnesty International's campaign for its abolition. My view is not a matter of leniency, but to kill other human beings in retribution, no matter what they have done, cannot, to my mind, be right, since it forecloses the possibility that they may change. I actually agree with that. And I'm not going to apologize if you disagree, but that is my belief. And of course, you're free to have yours. I did not always feel that way, but over the past several years, in some of the not some of the situations, I haven't been through anything like that, but in some of the spiritual work that I've done on myself and some of the realizations that I've had, I have absolutely changed my view on what punishment should look like regarding the death penalty. But I think that's like a whole other can of worms, and I do not mean to open that, but we're on this subject, so I'm just agreeing with him. Now I understand that violent retribution, reacting aggressively to an assault, for example, is something quite deeply rooted in human existence. In this, we are not unlike other animals, which, when challenged, may even fight to the death. But the exercise of vengeance seems to be a particularly human trait, one related to our capacity to remember. In primitive human society, revenge may have been necessary for survival. But as society developed, people came to recognize the negative consequences of revenge and the value of forgiveness. This, I think, is what it really means to be civilized. So I believe that to indulge our violent instincts by pursuing revenge is misguided and not in anyone's best interests. For the only guaranteed result of vengeance is that it will sow the seeds of further conflict. It stirs up resentment and with it the danger of an escalating cycle of violence and retaliation, which can only be broken when the principle of vengeance is itself discarded. Indulging a craving for revenge creates an atmosphere of fear, further resentment, and hatred. By contrast, where there is forgiveness, there is the chance of peace. Therefore, in my understanding, revenge has no place in the exercise of justice. The very idea is outdated. For while revenge weakens society, forgiveness gives it strength. And you know what? His sentence does make sense. Revenge really doesn't have anything to do with true justice. I know a lot of people say justice was served if something bad happens to another person. And even when it comes to somebody dies and, they were doing something they shouldn't have been doing or died because the person they attacked them back. That's not really justice. That's not really the justice system. That's not really, I just understand what he's saying when you really pick it apart and look at it a little further. This was powerfully illustrated by what happened in South Africa after the dismantling of the apartheid system. Under Nelson Mandela's wise leadership, the African National Congress acted with magnanimity to ensure that there were almost no incidents of revenge against the minority white community. Had the leaders instead chosen to dwell on the past and create a climate of resentment, the situation could have been truly tragic. Instead, the government established the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, headed by my old friend and spiritual colleague, Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Following his moral example, the commission operated on the principle that the expression of truth by those responsible for serious wrongdoing, even atrocities, would have a healing and liberating effect for both the victims and the perpetrators of these crimes. Today, more than 10 years after the commission finished its work, there can be little doubt that the process brought peace of mind and closure to a great many people, both victims and violators. I had the great honor to meet President Mandela soon after South Africa obtained its freedom from apartheid. I was greatly impressed, not only by his gracefulness, but also by his total absence of resentment toward those responsible for his long imprisonment. To my mind, there is no doubt that the exercise of justice, far from being at odds with the principle of compassion, should be informed by a compassionate approach. I always remember the Justice Minister of Scotland's explanation of his difficult decision to release the man convicted of the Lockerbie airplane bombing. In his country, he said, people desire justice and want justice to be tempered by compassion and mercy. I am aware that his decision caused a great deal of controversy and anger among some of the victims' families. Nonetheless, I think the minister's statement was in itself very sound. When it comes to justice, compassion and mercy should not be brushed aside. Unfortunately, I think most people would disagree, and I think that's a big reason of why society is where it is, because revenge is everywhere. You see it on social media, all platforms, people being mean and hateful to each other, posting videos of doing mean and nasty things to each other, people having breakdowns in the grocery store and people posting videos and calling them a Karen because something triggered them and they were clearly not in a healthy state of mind, because you don't react that way when you're not in flight or fight. And the comments that I read sometimes break my heart at how mean we are to each other, how we find it so easy because we're behind a keyboard to say things that most of us would never say to another human being if they were right in front of us, for a variety of reasons. Or maybe we would, but it doesn't make it okay. It's part of what's damaging society, is just the stuff that people watch, the stuff that they believe, the things that we feed into and give attention to. The amount of comments that a hateful video gets far exceeds the amount of comments that channels like this get, because people want to see these kinds of things. And I'm sometimes one of those people too, and I have to tell myself, like, don't comment, don't attach to it. It's just a dumb video. Like, you can't let it bother you. But we really do need to be careful with what we're putting out there, what we are taking in, and our thoughts around them. It can be so damaging. And, we don't always have to agree with what people say and what they put out there, but we don't always have to sound off on it either. And I think that's something a lot of people, including myself, struggle with. Okay. I don't even know if that last part had to do anything with justice. It did. We were talking about justice and revenge, and a lot of this stuff comes from social media. Okay. Thought maybe I went off the train track. All right. Now, distinguishing the action from the actor. That's our next section. The important point about the principle of compassion as a basis for the exercise of justice is that it is directed not toward actions, but toward the actor. Compassion demands that we condemn wrong actions and oppose them with all means necessary, while at the same time forgiving and maintaining an attitude of kindness toward the perpetrators of those actions. Just as in theistic terms, God forbids sin while still loving the sinner, so too we should forcefully oppose wrong while maintaining concern for the wrongdoer. It is right to do this because, again, all human beings are capable of change. I think we all know this from our own experience. After all, it is not uncommon for those who led reckless lives when young to become responsible and caring as they gain in maturity and experience. In history, too, there are many examples of individuals whose early lives were morally reprehensible, but who later brought great benefits to others. We might think of Emperor Ashoka, for example, or St. Paul, or numerous others. This capacity for change is true even of those who have committed the most terrible deeds. I am encouraged in this belief by my discussions over the years with prisoners' representatives and social workers involved with prisons, both in India and the United States. It is a great tragedy that in many countries, as statistics suggest, a majority of prisoners later reoffend. Some countries are now introducing rehabilitation programs, which offer offenders guidance on how they can, through mental training, gradually readjust their understanding of the world and learn to contribute to rather than detract from the well-being of others. I do think that the prison system needs to be totally revamped. Throwing a bunch of people in there and then not doing anything to better themselves. There are programs out there, but from what I understand, there's never enough of them because people are going there and they're staying there or they're coming back. And we also have a lot of people from other countries that end up there that should be maybe back in their own country serving probably a worse sentence there, but probably more like a vacation here. But they are very packed, and it's like an animal shelter, but for people, and you don't really get anything. You don't really grow. I know that a lot of people do find religion in prison, and there's people who might scoff at that and say it's just an act. But think about it. If you have nothing but time on your hands to think, I could easily understand how many people genuinely do find it. But without sort of retraining your brain, and your brain can be retrained at any age. It is very pliable. Without learning other things to go along with whatever newfound religion or finding God or finding Jesus that you have found, you still don't have all the tools. You still there's so many aspects of us that need to be addressed, right? Anyways, okay, I'll stop because that's just another deep subject there. All right. Did I finish it? Oh, okay. For example, under an initiative introduced by Kiran Bedi in Delhi's high-security Tihar jail, prisoners are given classes in mindfulness meditation. I am optimistic that, with time, this program will prove effective in helping even the most desperate inmates develop a sense of purpose in life through concern for others. I am always humbled when I meet the people who run such programs and the prisoners who have felt their positive impact. To summarize, let me say simply, remember that even a criminal is a human being like yourself and capable of change. Punish the actor in proportion to the misdeed, but do not indulge the desire for vengeance. Think rather of the future and of how to ensure that the crime is not repeated. I think this is the last. Yeah, we're almost done here. Altruistic punishment. Actually, you know what? Let me see something here. I think I messed up and thought it was a lot shorter. Okay, no, we're good. Sorry. Not long ago, I attended a conference in Zurich on the subject of compassion and altruism in economic systems. At the conference, an Austrian economist named Ernst Fehr introduced an interesting concept that he calls altruistic punishment. He illustrated the concept by means of a game of trust. The game is played in rounds and involves 10 players. The players are given equal amounts of money and asked to contribute some of it as a collective fund. The experimenter explains that in each round, the total amount the players contribute to this fund will be doubled and then redistributed equally among them. In the early rounds, most players are quite generous, making substantial contributions to the central fund, in the belief that others will do the same. This, I think, reflects the intuitively optimistic side of human nature. Inevitably, however, there are some individuals who hold back and contribute nothing. In basic monetary terms, they see that what profits them most is to keep their share of what is given, without spending any money of their own. Some people, I understand, are known in the language of economics as free riders. As a result of their behavior, the other players start to feel they're being taken advantage of and begin to contribute less and less to the central fund, until finally, usually by about the 10th round, the entire system breaks down. At this stage, no one is willing to contribute, even though the experimenter's offer to double any money contributed is still in place. At this point, the players are introduced to the notion of altruistic punishment, a mechanism by which they can punish the free riders. By contributing some of their own money to a non-refundable punishment bin, they're able to force free riders to pay double that amount. So, for example, by spending $3 on punishment, a player can make the free rider pay $6. As it turns out, once this system is introduced into the game, cooperation between players can be sustained more or less indefinitely. Would-be free riders are deterred from taking advantage of others, and as a result, the players continue to contribute to the central fund, and everyone benefits. Although this experiment was principally designed to test a theory in economics, I feel that it also contains a universally applicable message. It shows us that punishment can be exacted in a way which benefits everyone, including wrongdoers themselves. It illustrates the point that punishment which does not exact revenge, but rather corrects the wrongdoer, is in everyone's interest. Forgiveness. Forgiveness is an essential part of a compassionate attitude, but it is a virtue that is easily misunderstood. For a start, to forgive is not the same as to forget. After all, if one forgets a wrong that has been done, there is nothing left to forgive. Instead, what I am suggesting is that we find a way of dealing with wrongdoing that gives us peace of mind and at the same time keeps us from succumbing to destructive impulses like the desire for revenge. I will say more about ways in which we can do this later on, but part of what is required is an acceptance that what is done is done. Whether at the level of the individual or at the level of society as a whole, it is important to acknowledge that the past is beyond our control. The way we respond to past wrongdoing is not, however. As I have already mentioned, it is vital to keep in mind the distinction between the doer and the deed. Sometimes this can be hard. When we ourselves or those very close to us have been victims of terrible crimes, it can be difficult not to feel hatred toward the perpetrators of those crimes. And yet, if we pause to think about it, we realize that distinguishing between a terrible deed and its perpetrator is actually something we do every day with regard to our own actions and our own transgressions. In moments of anger or irritation, we may be rude to loved ones or aggressive toward others. Later, we may feel some remorse or regret. But when looking back on our outburst, we do not fail to distinguish between what we did and who we are. We naturally forgive ourselves and perhaps resolve not to do the same thing again. Given that we find it so easy to forgive ourselves, I disagree with that. I think forgiving yourself is sometimes harder than forgiving other people. In fact, if you are struggling with forgiveness and would like to know more about it, I did read a book on that, The Sacred Art of Forgiveness. I found it very helpful. It was a step-by-step guide talking about forgiveness, talking about the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation, forgiveness and forgetting, and in the ways that it can benefit you, the person that is forgiving, and explaining why forgiving is not a weakness. It's not excusing a person's behavior. I found it really helpful because I think forgiveness is something that all of us are always working on at different levels. So I can't say that I agree with this. I think we're pretty hard on ourselves in general. So given that we find it easy to forgive ourselves, surely we can extend the same courtesy to others. Of course, not everyone is able to forgive him or herself, and this can be an obstacle. For such people, it may be important to practice compassion and forgiveness toward themselves, as the foundation for practicing compassion and forgiveness toward others. Another truth to keep in mind is that forgiving others has an enormously liberating effect on oneself. When you dwell on the harm someone has done to you, there is an inevitable tendency to become angry and resentful at the thought. Yet clinging to painful memories and harboring ill will do nothing to rectify the wrong committed and will have no positive effect on you. Your peace of mind will be destroyed, your sleep will be disturbed, and eventually even your physical health is likely to suffer. If, on the other hand, you are able to overcome your feelings of hostility toward wrongdoers and forgive them, there is an immediate and perceptible benefit to you. By leaving past actions in the past and restoring your concern for the well-being of those who have done you wrong, you gain a tremendous feeling of inner confidence and freedom, which allows you to move on as your negative thoughts and emotions tend to dissipate. For me, the power of forgiveness is strikingly apparent in the example of a man I consider a personal hero, Richard Moore. In 1972, at just 10 years old, Richard was completely blinded by a rubber bullet fired by a British soldier in Northern Ireland. The tragedy could have turned the boy into an angry and resentful man, but Richard never bore ill will, and he devoted his life to the positive cause of helping and protecting other vulnerable children around the world. In fact, he made it his business to find the man who blinded him and tell him he was forgiven. The two men are now friends. What a marvelous example of the power of compassion and forgiveness. Though we Tibetans have suffered a great deal, still as a people, we try to refrain from succumbing to any tendency for hostility and revenge. Even toward the Chinese communist soldiers responsible for atrocities against Tibetans, we try to maintain compassion. Sometimes this produces unexpected results. Recently, for example, I met the son of a Chinese cavalry officer who, as a member of the People's Liberation Army in the late 1950s, was involved in the persecution of Tibetans. The father, now old, had sent me a message through his son offering regret and sincere apologies for his deeds. To hear this was most moving. Yet I think that, had there been hatred on my part, this incident would have only served to increase it. By not clinging to past experiences of injustice, by consciously trying to develop compassion toward our Chinese brothers and sisters, we Tibetans avoid being stuck in the past and can maintain a sense of freedom. But this does not mean that we do not stand firm against the injustices we face. So in answer to those who insist that justice rather than compassion should lie at the heart of any system of ethics, I suggest that in reality, there is no conflict between the principle of justice and the practice of compassion and forgiveness. Indeed, in my understanding, the very concept of justice is itself based on compassion. The scope of ethics. This is the last page right here, a little longer than I thought. In conclusion, it is worth briefly exploring the scope of ethics. If ethics is understood only as a mechanism for maintaining social order, then it will cover only those aspects of our outward behavior, which have a direct and observable impact on others. And if it only relates to the impact of our actions on others, in effect to the consequences of our actions, then whatever feelings and intentions we may harbor in our hearts will be irrelevant or neutral with regard to ethics. But this I cannot accept. This understanding of ethics is much too narrow. The very notion of ethics makes no sense without a consideration of motivation. If we bumped our head on a tree, would we blame the tree? Of course we would not. The idea of moral responsibility presupposes the presence of some inner motivation. So to me, to describe ethics without reference to the level of motivation seems very incomplete. In fact, the inner motivational dimension is the most important aspect of ethics. For when our motivation is pure, genuinely directed toward the benefit of others, our actions will naturally tend to be ethically sound. This is why I consider compassion to be the core principle on which an entire ethical approach can be built. It is from a compassionate concern for the welfare of others that all our ethical values and principles arise, including that of justice. Okay. That was these chapters are difficult to read. So as I said in the last video, please bear with me. For some reason, he writes the way he would talk. So it makes it really difficult. And I understand he's not an author first and foremost. So nothing against it. It's just difficult to read out loud. So I hope that you're okay with how it's going so far. So in the next chapter, we will talk about one of my most favorite things that I think we all should be really mindful of: discernment. We're going to talk about the role of discernment, critical thinking, thinking for yourself, deciding what you want to carry as your truth or not, looking into things when you're not sure and not taking anyone's word for it, questioning things. Those are all parts of discernment. So we're going to talk about where discernment plays into the topic of beyond religion. This should be interesting. And let me just take a look and see what... Now, this is the really short one. So yeah, I got confused. I thought 5 was the really short one. So this next one will be a really short one to balance out this long one. All right. So let's stop right there. And I'll put my bookmark on. And thank you so much for joining me. And until next time, please, as always, take care of yourself. Take care of those around you. I will see you very soon for chapter 6. Take care. Bye-bye.